exciting. Hey, who is that?
Hello.
Who is that? J.R. Ewing. I don't recognize the gentleman. Nice to have you here.
Thank you. Well, thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, how many times did I invite you? Like I harassed this poor man until he said, I cannot take no more harassment. I got to appear. And he has, and I'm thankful for his choice. Glad to have him here. And I know a lot of other people are happy to hear on, and we're looking forward to seeing him. We are short two other people. I don't know where they are. Perhaps they will pop in. Oh, I think one is coming right now, I believe, but not quite here yet. Is that a person? Yes, that is a person. That is a person, and
Holy
that is
shit,
a person.
He does know how to work technology.
My concern about Curtis is I thought he'd still be running somewhere, but I guess he made it finally. Congratulations! Congratulations if you made your 32. Was it 32 miles?
It was supposed to be 31 and change, whatever the 50 kilometers is converted to miles. But
hi, Kristen, by the way. Hi.
Hi, Kristen.
32.89 is the final answer. 32.89 miles.
Over what period of time?
It took me 11 hours and 9 minutes.
Sounds like a lot of fun.
It was so much fun. Yeah.
You ran how? What did you do? You ran how many miles?
It was an obstacle course race. We don't need to get into it. People will dox me if we get too far into it. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
Before I say hello to Kristen, my youngest son's girlfriend has run the New York Marathon a couple of times and done pretty well. I mean, like 3 hours and 40 minutes, something like that.
Wow.
Yeah. So I can appreciate what you are doing. And hello, Kristen. How are you?
Good. Sorry, I'm late.
Oh, no problem. No problem. I was welcoming JR because JR hasn't been here for a while.
I know. It's good to see you.
Yeah. Great.
Thank you.
Great
Well,
to see
it's
everybody.
nice to finally meet you virtually. So I've seen a lot of your posts. So yeah.
Same with you.
Now, before we begin,
we haven't seen him since November because I was on for the first time for 5 minutes today just to see what kind of nastiness Richard was making fun of me with. So
yeah, I did see your retweet. So
yeah.
Yes. The confusion might be there's a big JR and there's a JR.
Yeah.
This is JR and there's the big JR, and we're in touch. We're in touch with everybody. I gave everybody the option, so I'm going to put it out there. If you have a funny or an attempt at a funny, then go for it. Looks like Curtis does, so I'm going to throw it to Curtis.
Well, are we live? I see.
We're live.
Yeah,
okay,
we've been live.
As opposed to live dead. What's the alternative?
I don't know. It said something about backstage, so I didn't know going in. Kristen walked right into the live show.
Yeah, before I let you in, you're backstage.
Awesome.
Now you're front stage.
And Kristen, did you not get the memo on the hat? We're supposed to wear hats.
Oh, we'll get one.
Okay.
I always wear a hat.
I'll be right back.
All right. I actually looked this up, like, no joke, 10 minutes ago. So sorry if the delivery is off, but it's a joke story. So a respectable lady went into the pharmacy, walked up to the pharmacist, looked straight into his eyes and said, "I would like to buy some cyanide." The pharmacist asked, "Why in the world do you need cyanide?" The lady replied, "I need it to poison my husband." The pharmacist's eyes got big and he exclaimed, "Lord have mercy, I can't give you cyanide to kill your husband. That's against the law. I'll lose my license. They'll throw us both in jail. All kinds of bad things will happen." Absolutely not. You cannot have any cyanide. The lady reached into her purse and pulled out a picture of her husband in bed with the pharmacist's wife. The pharmacist looked at the picture and replied, "Well, now that's different. You didn't tell me you had a prescription."
I like it.
Nice.
I thought I was looking at jokes for integrity, and I was
that's great. That was, you know what, the delivery was fantastic.
Yeah.
I probably should have put a condition on it that the jokes had to be under 4 minutes.
I know. But I thought it was appropriate because I was looking for jokes on integrity. I could have told a short one like FINRA is out there to protect investors, right? That's a joke and a one-liner. But instead, I thought it was great because it shows that sometimes those in power don't have any kind of interest until it affects them.
My goodness, this is embarrassing because your like thought process on jokes is so much more thoughtful than mine. Mine is, what's my topic today and can I find something? It's not much more than that. And of course, I have mine that I have to deliver. For some reason, I've been focusing on attorneys. I don't know why. I have one I have to repeat, and I had to couple that with a second one. So it's going to be 3 and 4. That's really what we're waiting for. How do you get a lawyer to smile for a picture? You say,
I should know this, right?
Yeah.
say fees.
Ah.
All right. How do you this one is, well, I'm going to skip.
How did I
this
get
one.
sucked back into this? How did I get sucked
You
back
said
into
yes.
Why don't lawyers play
Jesus
why don't
Christ.
lawyers play hide and seek? No one will look for them. Now, here's
Come on, one more.
Here's
One
I got
more.
a double, a bang bang. This is a repeat one, but it kind of goes with the last one. This is kind of a little brutal. How do you keep a lawyer from drowning? Shoot him before he hits the water, or take your foot off his head.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. And the last but not least, how can you tell if a lawyer is well hung? If you can get a finger between his neck and the noose. Okay. All right. Those last two I thought were a combo effort there. Before we go through, where we're going to head, anybody have anything in particular they wanted to speak about? And I can call on people, like we can talk about real estate, and because I always like reading Kristen's comments on commercial real estate and the state of real estate, banking, whatever. Have anything new along those lines? I know I saw something recently by you.
Yeah, I mean, it's coming out more. There was a big meeting where private equity is talking about how much trouble they're actually in, even though they're presenting a good front and saying it's okay, but they're really struggling liquidity wise. So that is an interesting thing to keep an eye on. And then I just keep looking at different cities. New York is the one that I've been focusing on primarily lately, but there was one where the Bloomberg headquarters, they re-upped their lease, I think it's to 2040, but that same building has a loan, a big loan that is due. They offered to pay 25. Now, this isn't Bloomberg that owns the building. This, I think it's Steve Roth, whose company owns the building. They offered to pay, I think, 25 million. They said no. So it comes due next month. So it was sent into special servicing. So that's one to keep an eye on. And there's a couple like billionaires who are in trouble because they have these massive loans that they took out. And when you look at the loans, they took them out at like 1-2%. And now, you're paying much higher rates. So you can see why it's a problem, but it's just cascading through the country. We've seen it in China already, and Germany has been bad as well.
So what happens if these loans continue and it goes through? So special servicing is what the foreclosure department is, but it has different levels. So they can try a workout, they can try a bunch of things before they get to foreclosure. But if the valuations drop dramatically, you could do whatever you want. It's never going to make any sense. So what happens when these foreclosures happen? The banks have to revalue the assets.
And there's I'm seeing a lot of extend and pretend, they call it. So they're just extending and kind of kicking the can down the road. But the problem is you had that emergency bank loan program that ended in March. And a lot of those loans were for a year. So now is when you're going to start seeing them come due, right? Because people, yes, they took them out in March of 23, but they also took them out in June and July of 23. They're coming due. And we're talking, I think, it's over $1 trillion of commercial real estate loans that is coming due. I think it might be $2 trillion between this year and like the next couple of years. So it is a lot of real estate. And just look what Evergrande did to China and also Country Garden. And there's a couple others that are really having big problems. And those might not be as big as this, actually. So
yeah, and feel free, anybody who wants to jump in. That's like an issue that's completely quiet. Mm-hmm. We talk about the market and all the problems with the market. The real estate market is in a absolute state of distress. but it's kind of in the background and nobody's really talking about it. I would think at some point in time, it's going to be a problem, a real problem.
I just did one with Deutsche Bank too. They own some real estate in the States, in the United States, and they are having trouble with that. They had to pay, I think, if I have it correct, I should have brought my notes, but I think they paid $500 million for it, and then they sold it for $150 million. If that's the right, I shouldn't be quoting without my notes, but there was at least a building that sold in, I think, 2014 for $500 million, and then it just recently sold for $150 million. So that's a $350 million loss.
Not a big fan of Deutsche Bank, by the way.
Deutsche Bank is having a lot of problems, just so you know. Yeah.
Anybody else have any topics they want to address before I kind of take us somewhere else? Curtis?
Sorry. Go ahead, Curtis.
No, go ahead.
Well, Kristen, I was just wondering kind of what your background is. I know, I know you're on Twitter all the time, and I've seen a lot of your posts, but I never kind of understood how you got into the MMTLP community. So, kind of brief overview of kind of your story into this saga.
Yeah, I came to know MMTLP through Twitter, just watching it because I was watching a lot of the financial stuff, and then realized that this one, because right when they were going to halt it, right before the halt, I was watching just to see what they would do, because it was sort of emphasizing what we were talking about with counterfeit shares and how they impact the market. And we were trying to educate people about that. I was learning about it. And then when that happened, I was like, wow, this is, it just illustrated how massive the problem is, right? That you're going to halt something like that. So, I think because of my reporting, I stopped reporting in 21. But, I did that for 31, 32 years. So it's just kind of in me. I'm fascinated by information and news, and I kind of like to see the other side of it. And so I realized just what's naturally out there might not be what's really happening. So I like to kind of dig or really dig.
Yeah, that's why like I said, I never kind of knew what your backstory was into.
I believe she was also a reporter for New York One in New York.
Yeah. So
okay. Thank you.
That's where the curiosity comes from. So
absolutely. Really
now,
good.
Curtis, you were going to say something? Go for it.
No, I think most of my topics center around the agenda items that you've set forth. So I'm good.
Yeah, I'm going to throw out, this is kind of like nothing to do with anything. I was have been running around the last couple of days because I have kids in town, and we had a bris, which is a circumcision for my new grandson, which I was at today, which is an interesting experience. That's all I can say. But it reminded me of a Saturday Night Live episode from the very beginning of Saturday Night Live. And Ricardo Montalban used to do commercials, I think, for Chrysler. And this is a long time ago, 40 years ago. And what they used to talk about was how smooth the ride was and how quiet the ride was. And in one of the episodes, the skit was, there's a mohel in the back seat and he's doing a circumcision as they're driving to show how smooth the ride was. So that came back and stuck in my mind today.
See, I think of the Seinfeld episode, a brisk.
Now, what's interesting about these two gentlemen, and Kristen, I could have called on you, but these two gentlemen were going to be witnesses in my arbitration. So we were at the point we were going to have discussions about preparing for the testimony right when it concluded. And I kind of wanted to so part of what I've tried to do is to illustrate to people kind of stuff about law that might make sense. And so not everybody's testified and not everybody knows what a witness might be thinking, because I can imagine there's anxiety from being a witness because you don't have a lot of experience testifying and it might be, tough. So it would be interesting for me to hear, and perhaps other people to hear, what both of you thought. So let's start with Curtis first.
I'm always so shy to share my opinion, especially publicly in these matters. Sarcasm.
Yes.
But yeah, I think my journey in all this is similar to everyone else's, and that is the deeper down the rabbit hole we go in research, in your documentation of the arbitration process, everything that touches the process that has been revealed through MMTLP. And it's not necessarily a standard operating procedure, right, that we've gone through. We have a spin out from, we have preferred share distribution. We have a spin out involved. There's multiple layers, multiple entities that are involved. But the one overarching theme is that this is a stacked deck process against the average retail investor. And if there's anything that goes awry, you are completely unprotected from the very organizations and the regulators that are by face supposed to protect you, right? By their mission statement designed to facilitate fair and free marketplaces. But in reality, they're there to protect their customers, of which the most prominent ones are not you and I, the average retail investor. So everything is kind of wrapped up in that statement. And I think, you know, it doesn't matter if it's FINRA, if it's the SEC, if it's the broker dealers, it really doesn't matter which angle that you look at it. There's, I think it's deeply incestuous all around.
How about you, JR?
I'm not sure what the question was. I thought the question was, how did you feel about testifying in your arbitration?
It was, but I enjoyed Curtis's answer, even if he was answering a different question. So, you know, whatever.
So I've actually testified in arbitrations before, from an employment law standpoint, and you know, being an attorney,
Were you a defendant?
No, well, actually, I don't remember which side. I don't remember.
I was just kidding you there.
No, I testified on behalf of the company in multiple arbitrations, and I make a terrible witness because I'm a lawyer. I pick apart the question in my mind before I answer it. So I know that this experience wouldn't have been like that. But to be honest with you, I knew you had asked us to testify, but I was going to be shocked if we actually would have. So
no. If we would have gone forward, you guys were testifying.
Well, yeah, I know, but you every time you've gone down a rabbit hole, you know, you end up with 9 more briefs before you get to where you're supposed to be.
True.
So,
that's true.
So, you know, I'm thinking in my mind, yeah, if we do testify, it's not going to be for another 6 to 8 months because the process has been dragging out so long. So I really wasn't overly concerned with it. Yeah, again, I've done it before. So
yeah, I had zero anxiety about it.
That's good.
I feel like the other side, I'll just refer to them as the other side, has a much more arduous process. When it's a web of lies, it probably takes a lot more to coordinate that. But to share my personal experience and the information that I found and that we have uncovered collectively is just straightforward, right? And we've been telling the story over and over and over again. So it's more of a different audience, but the same exact exercise. Whereas it's interesting to see how these facts are presented in a specific narrative from the other sides. But I didn't have any anxiety about it.
You know, I bitched and moaned about this arbitration for as long as I was in it. And I tried to kind of demonstrate what I thought, you know, I'm showing, here it is. I thought I was pretty, if you looked at the record, I think you'd find I was transparent. But, you know, I detected there was another major problem in just the structure of it. So I haven't mentioned, but I found out because I got a bill. So I got a bill for, you know, the arbitration, which I thought was going to be a big bill. And I've paid, you know, I had fees in federal court, fees in state court, fees in the arbitration. So I paid an initial deposit. I think it was like $2,500. And I filed close to 80 filings in the arbitration. So I thought, because of that the bill would be humongous because the arbitrators would have to read this stuff and make a decision and whatever. So I find out they don't charge for any of those, nor does the arbitrator get paid for any of those. So now maybe my arbitrator, who seemed to have no understanding of the case, knew everything and had read everything and its rulings that didn't give a reason or a hearing. There was something there. But when they're not charging for it, it makes you wonder whether anybody's really doing anything.
Right. Yeah.
And that's on top of what Curtis suggested is, you know, everything's stacked, really. And the problem with the arbitration system is not only is discovery limited, but what discovery you get is designed so if Curtis has a problem with Fidelity because Fidelity, his broker, made a trade that he didn't authorize, or the trade was too much or something like that. The documents that they let you get are the trading documents that apply to you. So your statements, whatever. Anything outside of, and there's a list that you're entitled to it, but it comes down to basically you get your account statements. That's what you get, because that should solve your issue. If the issue is about some trade, you could prove it, but it's not set up to do anything beyond that. So if you have a more complex problem, like counterfeit shares to a company that's no longer in business, that's U3 halted, none of the discovery that's set up applies. And the way the system is set up, they're anti-discovery beyond that. So there's literally no way to prove up the case. That's ultimately why we get to the point we get. And, you know, I thought, for example, like the U3 halt would be relevant, and that might justify some discovery. And it was relevant, especially because the people at FINRA and the SEC are talking to each other. And if I wanted to like ask, because I was going to, I'd show Curtis the FOIA document and I'd ask him, you see this? And tell me what you think, without being able to kind of lay a foundation of having somebody say what it is, being somebody from FINRA or somebody from the SEC. I could ask him, and the other attorney is going to object, and the arbitrator, who may not quite be on our side, is going to sustain the objection. And then those documents, which are extremely important, have no value and no use, which is really frustrating. So I think and you know, I'd love some feedback from everybody, but I think the arbitration system has to be completely redone and taken out of the hands of the people that are impacted. So, you know, FINRA was a defendant in this case, in my initial case. So how could they be the body that's deciding the dispute, or at least having control over the decision making? So I'd be really interested in getting your takes on that, hearing it from the outside.
Well, I mean, I think it's because FINRA will use that arbitrator again, and you won't probably. So, no. You know, I mean, you may because you're an attorney, but the average person is not going to. So who's paying the bills? And FINRA wants to, you know, they probably have a select group that they choose from and give them the business, and then the decisions probably go their way.
Yeah. Curtis?
Well,
go ahead, Jer. Go ahead, Jer.
I mean, the whole system is structured against whoever's filing. I mean, that's the bottom line. From you know, knowing what to do, how to do it, all the way up to knowing and understanding the rules of discovery and the limitations you have. I mean, you and I are attorneys, so we knew right off the bat going into any kind of arbitration that the cards are stacked against us. I mean,
yeah, and we had many private conversations about what to expect and what I expected.
Right. And so, you know, I mean, if you recall, you and I, after Jaworski was argued in front of the Supreme Court, and after listening to the justices talk about that, you know, we came up with an argument for why the arbitrations fit into the same argument that Jaworski was making. You know, FINRA is arbitrarily taking your right to a jury trial away from you by forcing you down an arbitration path that they control. And so, you know, talk about wiping your ass with the Constitution, and somehow they've managed to do that. The whole process is stacked against whoever's filing, and it's all in favor of their 105 member broker dealers. I mean, if you think about the argument that we talked about, you can't go into you can't find a broker to utilize in the United States unless they're a FINRA member. So all FINRA members are required to have the arbitration clause in their terms of service. So they've effectively shut you out of federal court and taken your right to a jury trial away. Now they're still an ad hoc government agency, so they're required to follow the Constitution. So you and I talked about that. We think there's a sound argument that they fall right in what we think is going to be the Jaworski rule when the Supreme Court finally rules here, that they're arbitrarily taking that right away from you.
Were you going to say something, Curtis?
I have nothing to add to that.
Yeah, I was going to say is, and I've participated. This is not a matter of arbitration per se. Although arbitration, if you are on the plaintiff's side, as a general rule, the awards are going to be smaller. That's just across the board. Doesn't make a difference what kind of arbitration. But I've participated in a lot of arbitrations. I've participated in arbitrations where the arbiter was a federal judge. So it's not arbitration. It's the way they do arbitration. And again, where you don't, in our situation, the SEC doesn't provide documents and FINRA doesn't provide documents. So where are you supposed to get the information? Magically, it's magic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, any civil case, for people don't have the experience that JR and I have, in any civil case, so you have a claim going in, you might have evidence, but as the case goes on, you build the case. It's not like it's static and you have to have it. So they've structured a system whereby you can't prove up a case. And it's ridiculous considering for retail, what's your, in let's say in the MMTLP situation, our potential sources of change are Congress, FINRA and the SEC, or your broker. FINRA and the SEC, there's no chance, and they have immunity. The broker stacked, really stacked, and you're left with Congress and whatever that brings. And except in a circumstance where you can get people to stay together for a long period of time as a community, it's never going to work. People will be fractioned, they're going to lose interest.
Well, the other thing too is they have unlimited resources.
Right.
They have unlimited resources. You're talking about, and we talked about this how many times we said you're taking on the largest financial institution known to mankind. I mean, just put your head around that for a second. And so they have unlimited resources. They have all the time in the world, and they have the regulators in their back pockets. And dare I say, probably some members of Congress as well too. So how do you beat that? How does a group of average American citizens overcome that? I don't know the answer.
And you were right. You were saying something. You were talking about all the brokers. So there's a concept in law, because you're supposed to be able to bargain, right? If you have a contract with somebody, you're supposed to be able to bargain on the terms. And if you can't bargain with the person you're dealing with, you could find somebody else doing the same thing and maybe get a better deal. And if you can't, then you have no bargaining power. So here's a case. It's not like you can find a broker where you can get another shake. You can't. Either you decide not to invest or you're subject to the arbitration provision. And as JR was saying, at least they could have the decency to say you're waiving your Seventh Amendment right to a jury trial. So be aware of that. You don't have to sign it, but be aware that you're giving up some constitutional rights. They just kind of tell you what you can't do. You can't, no jury trial, you're discovered. And by the way, if you had like your fidelity contract in there, if you looked at the contract and it's the very last provision in the contract, so they make sure that you can't say before you signed it, you didn't see that provision, but it tells you no jury trial, no right to discovery. The arbiter might be in the tank. It doesn't exactly say they're in the tank, but it says they might be a financial person. So they tell you up front, and that's the way they cover themselves, but there's absolutely no remedy otherwise. We're kind of like stuck. So I know and I respect the job that Curtis has done. Could you give us kind of like an up-to-date feel on where you think MMTLP is and where you'd like to see it go?
Yeah, I chose that joke intentionally, right? Hopefully the intent comes through. So I had the same question and the same doubts that everybody else has, right? Like knowing the further you look into this and the history and the precedent that's taken place beforehand of other scenarios, maybe not equal, maybe not exact blueprint copies or carbon copies of them, but everyone has failed. prior to this point at not exposing the manipulation, but actually eliminating it in full and totality. So I think what causes the paradigm shift is when you have the picture of the pharmacist's wife in bed with the lady's husband, right? That's the paradigm shift. And so I think the closest example and metaphor that I'm drawing here is obviously DJT.
Yeah.
So I can't think of anyone with more power or influence than a potential former president and potential presidential candidate, right? On the cusp of an election year, a presidential election year. And we now just had the fourth letter on June 6th sent to Congress, and the strategy behind that, and the bold approach of literally calling out these organizations that are known to conduct these practices, but it's suggested, hey, you should look at these firms, and the language the language that's used, literally asking for FINRA blue sheets, literally asking for the CAT data from the SEC, and then the suggestions to coordinate with the state attorney generals. I think the amount of attention that this has received, and whether you want to look at it from MMTLP, and I think it's phenomenal, obviously, that MMTLP was used as kind of the blueprint in that, not just from the congressional sense, but also what has been asked from the MMTLP community in the last year and a half. But to like GameStop is obviously front and center in national headlines, even outside of financial media, because of the storm that it's causing going through, mini squeeze 2.0 and what's going to play out later this month. I think the time is right that this is getting attention because of the parties that you have involved behind a retail population that is more educated now than ever before, certainly much more than 3 years ago when this was last majorly in the spotlight. And so, to answer JR's hypothetical question, how do you eliminate this? I don't know. I think the one possibility, and this came out in a X space, right, a few weeks ago with Patrick Byrne, who was maybe the poster child for fighting back against market manipulation. And he said, it's going to take somebody with power. And he wasn't even aware that Devin Nunes had sent those letters for DJT. So I think that's the answer. Obviously, those that we've been discussing this with in Congress are keenly aware of that. I think some of the conflicts of interest that have just been referenced, right? The bought and paid for politicians that exist, it creates this interesting allegiance question where if you have a political seat that isn't firm, right? It's coming up for either election this year or near term, or if you don't take the right party stance on this, that should be a nonpartisan issue, right? Market manipulation. I don't think there's anybody that feels, it's okay. I don't think liberal or conservative that there are dramatically different viewpoints on that. But if you don't take the right stance in support what is a broad voter base, right? You're talking about a national footprint here, that it could swing an election and could swing your power either immediately or unseat you. And regardless of how you receive your income as an elected official, a federal elected official, I think the uncertainty behind that is scary, right? Any major topic, any divisive topic is scary to them, or at least it would be to me if I were sitting in that position. So I think that's the answer. I think, congressionally, we've pushed as far as we can from just our own retail perspective and the education that we've gone through for the last 18 months. But to have people piggybacking like CEOs of companies and, in particular, those that have political authority and those relationships built, I think that is what swings the pendulum in our favor.
Kristen?
Yeah, and let me just comment on that. You're right, Curtis. I think that takes things to a different level. Nunes being involved and doing what they're doing with DJT. I mean, we would never get. I mean, we've gotten a lot of attention, but not the level and it's the word I'm looking for. Scrutiny is not the right word, but that's the one that's coming to mind. The scrutiny that they will be under now because you have a person of authority in a position of power basically using the blueprint that we went to Congress with. So yeah, I think it has teeth. You know, where it goes, we'll find out.
Kristen?
Yeah, I think he has the ability to hold people accountable more so than the average person, right? The average investor. So, I mean, when it first happened and he was upset about it, I was like, okay, that's great. It's good for everyone. Take the politics out of it. Doesn't matter. It's just we're talking about market manipulation. But where was he when he was in office, right? This has been going on for decades, as we know, but it's just gotten progressively worse because, as you know, if somebody can get away with something, more people try it, right? So that's how it's kind of steamrolled over the last few years. So I think it's great that he's coming out. He also is surrounded by people who know exactly how this works. So they are teaching him as he's writing these letters what to write, what to ask for. He's not giving them an out. It feels like he's building a case, right? Because it's like, this is the subject was fourth congressional letter, or, you know, something along those lines.
I agree.
From the last one, NASDAQ, FINRA, I mean, he's SEC, he's covering all his bases, and he's just taking the blueprint from MMTLP and just expanding it and going for it. And he was the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, so he knows how these investigations go. And he knows that if they start ignoring this, I would imagine there'll be some campaign ads, right? Saying, where does this person stand on this? And maybe Truth Social will put those out, who knows? But for people who get upset that it's DJT and it's Truth Social, who cares? It doesn't matter. You just need a voice out there. So regardless of how you feel on either side of the aisle, take the politics out and just be on board with this, because this is probably the only chance to really expose it.
Well, let me just add something. Yeah. I think, Kristen, the other important thing is, you know, Trump and the Trump organization have always known how to use the average American citizen to their advantage. And the fact that they're taking and using the MMTLP blueprint and voicing as much as they are, I mean, you know, he's on letter number 4. It's not going to be the last one. I think they're keenly aware that they will gain supporters among this group of people, no matter where they stand on any issue. And I'll be the first to admit, you know, I was a lifelong Democrat, and Richard knows that. But I got to tell you, you're standing next to me on this issue. There's a good chance I'm going to be voting for you. And I think there's a lot of people out there that are like me, that are just tired and pissed off, and they have picked up this issue and are apparently getting ready to really run with it based on that 4th letter. So, you know, he knows, his organization knows how to use a certain segment of the population and use it to their advantage. So,
yeah. So I'm going to give you like my 2 views of this. On the bad side, he's too powerful, and he'll be too successful, and he'll cut a private deal.
Right.
That's on the bad side.
Yeah, that's the concern.
So he's so good, unfortunately. But on the good side is, if it's going, you know, if this is straight and transparent and public, I can't see anybody who would have a better chance of getting the information requested than he. And if he can't get it, it would make me think that nobody else is going to be able to get it unless things completely change. And that would change my thinking. You know, we've, again, you know, going back to a remedy of MMTLP, there's the legal side, there's a non-legal side. There's legal actions, there's trade station action, there's class actions that are out there, and maybe there'll be class actions. But that is a real slog and slow and not really a great remedy for people that have been harmed, because they generally don't get compensated at the rate of their loss. But if we could stay away from that, and if he's able to open the door, I don't see how that's a negative thing. I know, and you know, it's like what you guys were saying. There's a whole group of people that just they get the willies if another name other than MMTLP is mentioned, because they somehow think that defeats the position of MMTLP.
Right.
I just think get more allies, the better, more the better. Nobody's going to forget about MMTLP. It's certainly a unique situation, doesn't trade, but there are people that are reluctant and are concerned about that. So it's interesting to me. I'm wishing him success. And like JR said, he's not my favorite person generally, but he is now. And
well, you know what it is? I think You're right. I think there is a concern that a private deal will be had, right? Because he's worried about his personal pocketbook too, so you could see that happen. But now it's created such a tension, I feel like, within the investor community. If they just bail and somehow get quiet again about DJT and all that, I think people will be really, really angry. And that's not going to help their voter base, right? So I think to be the hero, to be the David versus Goliath really in this story, you have to fight for every ticker out there. And by fighting for their ticker, they can expand it to every ticker and just demand changes. So,
well, it's interesting to see who controls the decision-making in the end, because the presidential candidate has a 6-month lockup period.
right.
And I think it expires before the election. So you could have, and again, I'm just talking. I have no idea. I'm not questioning anybody's motives. But if your interest was generating as much money before the election, then maybe you wouldn't be concerned about the ultimate outcome. If you're in it for the long, then that's different. I just don't know where it falls, because it's a lot of money to Trump, a lot of money, billions of dollars.
Yeah.
And then you wonder how much influence Patrick Byrne has, right? Because he's been talking about, obviously he put 30 million of his own money out to do the fight. So, and if he does have the ear there, then he can say, you cannot just fight for one ticker. This is a massive problem, and you'll be the hero if you do it.
Yeah, definitely will be a hero. I agree. And you're right. It's kind of like it's going to play out in front of our eyes. Either we're going to see it happen, or it's not going to happen, or, it'll be obvious the outcome. So I agree with you that it'll be apparent what the decision is, but it's amazing that he's gotten, that's what to me is incredible. Yeah. So we went through it. MMTLP. It's like again, it's a long slog, but some guy with a lot of power, really, he's getting a lot of pushback.
He hasn't got any response. There's been no response as far as I can tell, right?
Yeah, no, nothing of substance.
The only thing that made me think that maybe he's making some inroads in Congress was that letter that was sent the other day. I think Ralph Norman sent it, didn't he? At least he signed it.
Yes.
And that's the first time we've heard from him since December. I think he kind of wanted, I got the feeling that maybe he just wanted to speak out, say he spoke out, and then just let it go, right? But now he's writing another letter. So are they feeling some pressure in Congress? I don't know. Are they worried that they're going to put up campaign ads if they are, voicing against the CAT system, and they're, voicing against having a hearing or whatever, or giving blue sheets and CAT information out? So,
there is an easy solution to all this, and I know it's hard to believe, but I think easy solution is just remove immunity of the SROs, and that's it. We're done. We're done.
Yep. Let's do it.
If we can get discovery from FINRA on this, we're done. It never goes anywhere.
Right.
And there's no reason why there should be. Why I understand why governmental agencies. Okay, I may not be a big fan of it, but I at least understand it. But a private company, that makes no sense.
Well, I think if it keeps going, you're going to start to see people turn on each other, right? Because they're not going to be the one left holding the bag. So they're going to point the finger and say it's that guy. Go after him.
Yeah.
We're speculating on this, right? But let me because you mentioned
you're speculating. We're telling the truth.
You're telling fact. Yeah, attorneys don't speculate. They tell only truths, right?
Yeah.
Yes. So here's why I don't think this is for show. There was a way I like to play game theory a little bit around all these things and speculate what I would do in those positions. And the piece that wasn't necessary was to call out the organizations that are conducting the manipulation. And to do that causes them at minimum reputational risk, right? And there's blowback, and these are SEC filings. These are forever, right? They're in bold text forever with their names in searchable query. So initially I thought, all right, this is kind of sexy. They're putting the MMTLP letter in here. But when he started naming out Citadel, Virtue, G1X, Jane Capital, I was like, oh, he's in for war. Like he's declaring war, naming them. And then the evolution of each letter, we say fourth letter, that's just 4 letters to Congress. Then he's involving state attorney generals. He started with the letter to the head of NASDAQ. He's hitting every avenue, everything, everywhere, all at once. And so, if he's doing this just to make noise, he could do it in just one forum, one avenue, and accomplish the same thing and make noise. But to hit it on every front just seems nonsensical if that was your intent. So I feel that it's legitimate.
Yeah. And what if he is naming those companies, right? And then he's going to say who got donations from who. If Congress doesn't act, I'm going to call it out. I'm going to say, I listed this company, you get a donation. Is that why you're not? Like, that would be a great campaign ad, I think.
Yes.
So,
and not to be cynical, but how about this? If you were going to file an action, let's say nobody responds and whatever, how about you kind of wait close to whenever that lockup period is? Because I would think if you filed a lawsuit against all these companies, that your particular security might get a bounce because people would be optimistic that there might be a positive outcome and they're seeing action. Because, part of the problem here is it's hard to take action. So we talk a lot, but to do stuff, it's tough. And we're lucky that they're in a position that perhaps they can do something, for us all. We'll see. I've talked about, I think, it's amazing to me, and I had no idea. And I know, Curtis, you've been in the market longer, but I had no idea how deficient every aspect of the market was. I've learned, I watch Ham and listen to him and, just experience it and been an MMTLP. Every part of the system is deficient, but that doesn't stop at just who is taking the money. It's the management of a lot of companies too, which I'm going to get to GTII in a second. But I thought it was at least if we're going to have a fight, at least management could be helpful to the fight. If management is on the wrong team, then what do we do? And who is penalizing management? FINRA. Well, I am. But FINRA, the entities that ultimately have power are the same entities that we don't think are really looking out for our interests. FINRA and the SEC and all those other clowns, I'll say. Were you going to say something, JR? I thought you were going to say something.
I made a comment on something when you said who's penalizing management. Kristen and I both were like, you are.
Well, because again, I really do feel that if we're allowed to take action, that we should. That's why I got involved in GTII. And because Brian, or JR, excuse me, he was much more in depth in that security. I got into it later, and it's funny, and I'm sure Curtis is the same way. When I started this, I had no intention of aggressively pursuing this stuff. It just kind of happened. And same thing that happened with GTII. I hear a bunch of stories about bad management. Then I have interactions, and it's obvious everything was true. And I was interested in trying to get rid of management. And I did note, because I probably had like 750 shareholders that reached out just to me. And I really think it did give them some satisfaction, some emotional satisfaction that they were actually participating in something that could be constructive, even though it's funny because the constructive part is getting rid of management, but otherwise they felt kind of frozen out. And I have, it's interesting, all the things that protect existing management. For example, in GTII in 2022, there's 260 million shares. In 2023, the end of 2023, there's 380 million shares. That's mostly to management. Mm-hmm. The problem is in a lot of these statutes, if you want to go after the company, it's 10% of the shares. So even though that 100 million shares is BS, it still counts. And it works against the interest of shareholders. So another, a little detail, but very important. So in our case, we had to find 38 million shares. It's a lot of shares. And it took a bunch of people together. I think we were able to do it. And I'm hoping in a week or so that maybe there'll be a change in management. And I'm hoping also that if it's successful, that other tickers that are faced with the same situation where they think they're getting screwed by their CEO, they can actually take action against them and maybe get some kind of relief. That's kind of the goal. GTI is great. And if you're a shareholder, I think somebody here might be a shareholder.
I'm a shareholder.
JR, are you a shareholder?
Yeah.
There you go. I'm hoping for relief for everybody. Now, anybody want to comment?
No, I think that's good. I also think, Mark Bazille's going after the toxic lenders too. That's an avenue. So there are creative ways that you guys are coming up with, which I think is important because as, JR and Curtis were saying, what remedy do you have? You don't have any outlet. So you feel helpless and then you kind of give up, which is what they want, right? So now we're finding power in numbers really works and you get a couple smart guys like you guys to lead it. It's great. And then you have people educating like Ham and William. And so it all works, it's a kind of a collective community effort, but it's educating a lot of people. So as Curtis said, we're nowhere where we were 3 years ago. So
I think it's amazing how educated a large number of people are on an extremely complex factual issue. Kind of what you were saying when you started, when Curtis, when you started, part of the problem, and part of the problem I was going to face in the arbitration is tell me in 2 sentences what happened. Because if you tell the detail and you're not familiar with it, after about 20 seconds, you kind of drift off and it's hard to follow. And that's really one of the problems. And I think that's one of the tactics that's been used against us to show the complexity of it and say, basically, well, it's too hard to understand. Let's move on. I appreciate, Curtis, how much time you've put in, how much analysis. I've listened to a lot. I couldn't think of a lot of the issues. It's really helpful because it stimulates thought, even if it doesn't, not everything's going to solve everything.
Right.
But people who are thoughtful like you and think of issues that others may not, it really is helpful because it broadens everybody's reach. It makes them think about things they wouldn't have thought about. So I really appreciate it. I know JR, for example, he's quiet about it, but I know he spent a lot of time in DC working on this stuff and behind the scenes. And he, even though I probably should have asked him before I said this, a little late now, but he, because we would talk and he was doing all kinds of things, but he elected to kind of stay in the backdrop. So I'm appreciative of what he's done also. And, the basic thing is just got to keep it up. And if there's blocks, you kind of just shift away. Where there's a door closed, you look for the next door. And as long as we keep on, eventually, I really still believe this. Eventually, we will get a resolution. It just requires unbelievable staying power.
I spent a lot of time talking and doing Zoom calls, and it was interesting. It wasn't surprising, but it was interesting that you made the comment, you sum it up in 2 sentences, and we got really good at that because you could see the eyes being glazed over. But the deeper we got into this, the conversations that we had with some of the larger committees that actually, when we were talking to the majority side, they understood the issue. The bottom line was they understood the issue. But there was just a level of reluctance that I was surprised at when we were presenting things. Now, I don't, again, this was many months ago. I've not talked to anyone in Congress about this issue since November or early December. But there was a level of reluctance, and it was, well, this is GameStop, this is AMC all over again, and that was the brick wall that we were running into when we were meeting with these people, and Nunes takes it out of that realm into a whole new level. So, having him be involved in Congress is far more impactful than some schmuck like me, on a Zoom call.
I agree with you.
So I have a feeling that at some point that something's gonna give, whether it's with MMTLP or DGAT. I don't know the answer, but yeah, there was a level of reluctance when we were talking to these people, in addition to glazed over eyes.
Now, you think that's a financial interest, a contrary financial interest? I mean, I know that, there's theoretically, we're bound against insider trading. Congress, either they're like amazing in their picks, or they somehow have access to information that we don't.
Well, I think it was a little of both, Richard. I think, and we talked about this back when all of this was going on. At one point I had made a comment that, look, the other side is giving us free reins to walk the halls of Congress. And then something happened and I went, no, they didn't. They're just not showing their faces like we are. And so, the other side was in there working the phones and working the dinners and working the dinner parties and all those things while people were on Zoom. People like me and Curtis and all of us were on Zoom calls trying to explain this thing to people. So they were actively lobbying Congress as well too for their position. But the Trump organization getting involved, it legitimizes what we've been saying. I mean, what we've been saying now for at least for 2 years with MMTLP, but longer with the GME and AMC folks.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know, Curtis, are you in GME? Or were you
I do. This is funny and embarrassing simultaneously. And in one account, I never divested. So I still have legacy shares back from supporting the movement in 2021. I don't have a huge position, but yes, I do.
So what did you think? Because Roaring Kitty made an appearance on Friday, and Roaring Kitty, I guess, is he was the mover and shaker behind GME during its big move.
Yeah,
so big shaker. They wanted you to think it was Roaring Kitty, right?
Exactly.
I couldn't really tell. It was
to move the market like that. So
yeah, it was really it was an interesting. I watched like 2 minutes of his stream. It was interesting. I'd like to hear somebody else's more detailed opinion.
Yeah, I'll share that. One quick thing before we move to that, though, because I going through these various meetings with members of Congress over, I'll say the last 15 months, it is extremely complex. And in my opinion, and I'm using only my opinion as reference here, no one likes to be brought a difficult problem that doesn't have a solution. I don't like it personally at work. I hate when I'm brought those types of problems. It's there's no reward in the end of those extremely complex problems. If there's not, doesn't have to be an obvious solution, but if the problem is so large and complex that there is not a solution, the only way that you are ever attempting to solve those types of problems is when they're catastrophic, and you have to, because your sustainability relies on you solving that. And that, in my opinion, is this process that we've been trying to overcome with Congress, is trying to, one, convey and us learning and how to convey the message of what's happened. And then two, trying to paint this picture accurately that if you do not address this, you will be addressing it at some point in time, whether you want to do it under the MMTLP header or whether you want to do this in something with a financial collapse, you will be addressing this in some point in time. And so conveying that message and ensuring that, that they understand that part of it has been an obstacle. But I'll say that we are infinitely more efficient at doing that now in the last 3, 4, 5 months than what we were, 12 months, 15 months ago. Regarding Keith Gill's presentation, there are polar opposite viewpoints on what that was. Some people looked at it probably like Richard, the way that you just described it, and like, what the hell did I just watch for 2 minutes and then tuned out? But I think there was, by the way, if I did follow some of his stuff before, I didn't follow it religiously, and I wasn't following anything on YouTube or Reddit. But I watched it and researched it thereafter because of what he was accused of. Really starting with the House Financial Services Committee hearing in February of 2021. And I think to me, it's obvious intent that he's there think about what he present. I think like this. So this is what my interpretation of it. He opens the stream late. There were limit up, limit down halts that had occurred immediately prior to. He starts the stream late with the stock chart on Yahoo Finance up, and he's obviously for show, all injured and whatnot. His arm's in a sling. He's got bandages, and it's all for show. And you can see the movement, right? And dramatic movement. It's not subtle movement. It's dramatic movement. And when he's speaking and when he's alluding to what was speculated that is he going to exercise his options early? Is he going to execute his first live stream in 3 years? Is he going to execute here in front of all of us? And even him, and this is one of his gimmicks that he does, pulling up the magic 8 ball and shaking, just literally wild movements and price. And he's not doing it. You can see he doesn't even have his hands on the mouse, right? So I think it expressed some really clear intent, and that is he, as a retail shareholder, is not moving the market. His position that he has, even in options, it's a variable. It's not the variable that's moving the market. Institutional movement is what's moving that ticker, and playing against each other is what's moving that ticker, right? And the volatility and what will become hell to pay. But I thought it was a pretty brilliant way of not saying that blatantly, but conveying that with subtleties. So
interesting. Although he did
the part where he said, let's end it, but he was really showing that the algorithms read it as let's send it, halt.
Literally.
But he did lose like $250 million that day.
And went like this, like just like nonchalantly.
I mean, for JR, that's real money. But maybe for him, I thought it was a lot. I thought it was interesting. I don't understand. I don't have enough. I wasn't in GME. By the way, I probably own the stock, by the way, but I wasn't in the GME. But it was confusing to me, not being an outsider. I also wonder, because that community, is obviously impacted dramatically by whatever shenanigans went on. I always wonder if they would have, because I don't think they did, if they would have used the MMTLP model before MMTLP, whether they would have gotten a better outcome. If the ones who thought they were not treated properly would have been better treated. I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting because they kind of they were forced down the congressional route, but more in a defensive posture with House Financial Services Committee. Robinhood didn't take on nearly as much. They were, they were the ones that were blackballed as part of it. But it really, anyone that's looking at any of the payment for order flow broker dealers, it was far more than Robinhood that turned off the buy button. That was a collective coordinated decision, obviously, by coordinated by the same market makers that have that influence elsewhere. But they were forced down that route to a hearing with House Financial Services Committee. Subpoenas were issued for presence in that hearing. So I think they had a completely different taste in their mouth from a retail investor community, knowing that, okay, part of that stacked deck that we just talked about earlier, they got that firsthand against their will. And it was obvious that there were no positive outcomes that came out of those congressional meetings. Even the legislation that was put forth that came on the heels of that for further transparency with short sale activity and upping the frequency, it was voted down very publicly by the people that were making accusatory statements and really suggesting that Keith Gill, Roaring Kitty, was manipulating the market.
Yeah, I was going to say, isn't that interesting? Because he was, I guess there were threats that they would go against him now, at least in the recent time. So I think Ham brought this up. So what's the difference between, let's say, Roaring Kitty, whatever his name, Mr. Gill, if he promotes the fact he's going to do X, Y, and Z, if he's going to do X, Y, and Z, so he's going to do it and he does it, versus somebody like Carl Icahn saying he's going to buy Caesars and the impact it would have on that. I don't understand the difference. It seems to be, and again, I have no horse in this fight, but it seems like they chose to go after someone who was much more correlated with retail, or at least put the risk out there to impact retail, make them think, make them not trust, maybe not trust him, versus somebody like Icon, who's long time in the business and has a lot of friends, I'm sure, everywhere. Doesn't seem to be consistent to me. Anybody have a take on that?
Yeah, well, I think 3 years ago, the media could be fed a narrative that it was retail moving that whole thing. And it's just, people are going to buy that now, not 3 years later. And as educated as people are, they know it's hedge funds. So that doesn't work. And I just think, I had a thought and I lost it, but anyway, I'll come back.
Okay.
It's a simple answer. There's a membership card that you receive on whether you get to conduct crime at will or manipulation at will, and those that cannot. So it's a club. It's a small club, but you get that membership card, you have free reign.
Oh, I know what I wanted to say too. Did you see that Andrew Left was commentating?
Yes.
Or Roaring Kitty? I mean, he had said he was short GME.
Yes.
Monday, I think it was. And then he's the guy you're relying on for commentary right before Roaring Kitty or during it or whatever he did.
JR, were you in GME?
I was. I got into GME very early on, but I bailed before the run, and then I got back into it, and I bailed. I bailed right before it tanked the second time, soon after the split, but right before Bed Bath & Beyond ran, because I bailed on GME and went into Bed Bath & Beyond.
But the nice choice. Bed
Yep.
Bath & Beyond, that's doing well, right?
Well, I got out of Bed Bath & Beyond within 4 days. So
good for you.
And then
good choice.
Yep. And then unfortunately went into MMTLP. Actually, no, I went into GTII and then I went into MMTLP.
Oh, GTII first. That was a good trade.
Yeah.
That was good.
GTII at like $8.10 a share. Do you remember when it was that?
Yeah, no, I don't. No.
Yeah, but I got out of GTII pretty quickly, and that's when I found MMTLP.
Okay.
Wouldn't it be something if your GME and BBBY kind of came full circle? Wouldn't that be interesting if that happened?
I'm watching GME just because I think it is going to come full circle again. My own opinion is it's ready to pop, but I don't think it's going to pop like it did. They're gonna put the kibosh on it, but I wouldn't be surprised if it goes to $60-$70 here again in the next 2 weeks. That's my own personal opinion.
Well, I'm talking about the two companies.
The two companies. Oh, I'm sorry. That was all over Reddit for the longest time, and I was on both the Super Stonk and the Bed Bath & Beyond sub, and a lot of those guys are good guys. They're smart guys. I've read some really good posts out there, but there's also a lot of stuff that's coming out of left field, and there was more stuff coming out of left field after Bed Bath & Beyond went into bankruptcy than I could just get my head around. So I haven't been on Reddit. I haven't been on those subreddits in probably 2 years now. Well, once MMTLP hit, that was it. I was in MMTLP, and that's all I did. So
I wanted to quickly thank everybody who's watching this, because we're about 1,500 people watching this. So that's a good crowd, and appreciate everybody who's it's of course it's just JR. It's always JR.
I do need to go, guys. I need to call it a night. So Richard, as always, thank you. Love the jokes. Kristen, it was nice to finally meet and talk with you, even though I've seen your posts 1,000 times. So Curtis, I'm sure you and I will catch up at some point. So
good to see you.
Night, everybody.
Night.
Take care.
Good night.
If you guys have a few more minutes, I can ask you a couple more questions. Okay. Yeah. I kind of want to get I have like 3 more topics. They're kind of, they may be controversial topics, but give me your take if you want. If you don't want to, that's fine. First of all, do you think the Supreme Court should have ethics rules so that they should not take, so I'm going to lay out the question. So should they be able to take gifts from donors? Or if they are, should they have to disclose the gifts? And if so, when should they have to disqualify themselves? You can answer any of those or none of those. Why don't we start off with Kristen?
I think there should be some disclosure, yes, because you just want to know where, loyalties may or may not lie based on, and maybe there's nothing there, but just put it out there and then nobody will ask questions or think you're hiding something. So, but I don't know, like at what time frame and stuff that would be. That's for someone else to decide.
Okay. Curtis?
I agree.
Okay. That was short and sweet.
No, yeah. I mean, it have to be ethics rules, and anything that could even construe a conflict of interest for a position of that stature, just eliminate from even occurring. Yeah. So if you're going to allow acceptance of gifts, donations, then there would have to be full transparency and disclosure.
Yeah, I didn't understand, because federal judges have ethics rules. Federal judges, they have to comply with rules. They're there for life. They're Article 3 of the Constitution. They're there for life. Supreme Court justices are there for life. And up until, I think they just did, but up until recently, there was no ethics rules. They were like, free to decide whatever they wanted. Seems like a bad way of doing things. And seems like, especially where people question, courts, whatever, probably not a best way of handling things. Probably better to be transparent. And if there's nothing there, then so okay. If somebody gives you a gift and it doesn't influence you, okay. If it does, though, that's a problem and probably should be looked at. The second part, and it kind of relates to the bigger picture. So I heard a discussion, or at least I saw some reference, that Citadel and BlackRock are discussing opening up an exchange in Texas to compete with the New York Stock Exchange. So interesting. So give me an opinion about that, Kristen.
I'd be surprised if it goes anywhere. I think there was something like this in 2008 around the financial crisis that happened similar. Listen, they're powerful companies, but you have to get people to invest. I know, Ham always talks about companies, if they get so, like if you have a CEO who's fighting and cannot get anywhere in this stock market, you should go overseas, right? And just set up your company somewhere else, because you can trade on these other exchanges and get the investors to move over here if they don't feel like the United States is looking out for their best interests of regulators. So I think people now would probably be more likely to do that than to go onto an exchange by Citadel and in Texas. That would be my opinion. Who knows? But
Curtis?
Yeah, I don't know how successful it will be, but I do anticipate that it will actually occur. New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ have a bit of a duopoly right now, and they have 18 other investors outside of Citadel and BlackRock. And it's interesting because when you look at their institutional holders on New York Stock Exchange and NASDAQ, New York Stock Exchange is owned by the Intercontinental Exchange, ICE. This was brought up on a space last week, and someone asked, are there antitrust issues here? And if there were, they certainly come into play with those two exchanges as well. But when you look at who owns them, you have Vanguard and State Street as the two predominant holders of both. And so I don't think you're going to get into antitrust issues because you're going to cause questions for those that already exist. And the reason I think it's going to be successful is not because it's a great idea. What they've stated as kind of their mission statement is to avoid arduous regulation. And some of those things I agree with, right? There are some standards that were applied that were more politically motivated instead of, financially or efficiency driven. But I think, the president and CEO of BlackRock has made statements twice now in the last year about transforming the marketplace into this digital transformation and tokenization of securities. And Citadel has been making, again, very public investment in that front. And so it seems to be that this will be their blueprint for doing so. And the part that calls into question the antitrust is you have entities like Citadel that control every part of the transaction at that front. They now do their own clearing. Obviously, they're a hedge fund. They're a market maker. That part is scary. If they're controlling the exchange, not that the exchanges are impartial or fair, right? They're obviously an accessory to everything that we've described. But if they also are a majority investor in the formation of a new exchange that literally by mission statement is set out to avoid some of the regulation that is applied to other exchanges, which we know can also operate like the Wild West. Yikes. But I do think that it will actually roll out. That's just my opinion, but I hope it doesn't. We'll see.
Yes, I'm going to give you like the counterintuitive view here. So I would say Citadel Kenny, as I like to call him, because we're close. I think Ham had a chance to tackle him once, but elected not to. He's probably the antithesis of retail. And I think there's a decent chance they'll get an exchange set up. I think a decent chance that it will be, in terms of retail, it will certainly not be in the best interest of retail. I hope all the shorts go to that exchange. And I hope as a way of staying in business, that the New York NASDAQ have to change their policies and way of doing business to attract retail back away from that exchange that's going to be absolutely stacked against retail. So maybe the bad guys, by being so bad, will make the bad guys who we deal with better and easier to deal with. That's my hope. I do agree with you, Curtis. I think there's so much capital that those investors have. It's just going to be tough not for Texas to say, okay, bring it on. We'll collect our, whatever tax revenue out of whatever. And it's, and those, I agree with you in terms of Citadel. That's the head of the triangle, right? The top of the triangle, unfortunately. So interesting to see if it happens, and interesting to see what happens to the market as a result. Maybe there's going to be other, exchanges that'll open up too. I know Ham was looking at exchanges elsewhere.
Yeah, South Korea. Yeah, I mean, I think, if they're talking about Texas already, I feel like there's already been conversations, and it's probably far down the road for them to even have started to mention it publicly. Usually those things are in the works well before.
And it's interesting because in the securities business, and I follow, and I know Curtis does too, I follow Tesla. And so, all these securities originally were incorporated in Delaware, and now people are trying to shift outside of Delaware. So Texas is one of the marketplaces that is favorable to companies to go deal. Nevada is another one. So it's interesting to me that maybe those are coinciding. There's a movement of capital and companies to Texas, and maybe the new exchange will provide the access or capital for those companies. I don't know, but it's interesting that they seem to coincide at the same time. Because Tesla's in a position now where Elon Musk's pay package is in dispute. They're trying to move the company to Texas, and they're trying to fight the pay package, which is really an issue of how much of any case I've ever seen. This is really the issue: is how much will the plaintiff lawyers get paid? That's the question. And the plaintiff lawyers, because now it's been briefed somewhat. The plaintiff's lawyers are seeking about 29 million shares, which was equated to approximately $6 billion. And Tesla and one of their shareholders thinks that the appropriate sum, they think the appropriate sum is zero. But if it had to be paid, would be $13 million. That's quite a gap. And the judge is clearly not a friend of Elon Musk. So it'll be interesting to see what the judge rules to make her decision withstand scrutiny on appeal. Because if she awards $6 billion, probably not going to stand up.
Right.
Maybe 13 won't, but maybe 50 might. So it'll be interesting if she tries to manufacture some conclusion, which judges unfortunately do a lot of times. I've seen them, they work backwards from their conclusion and they have to justify it. And it ends up not being a great decision because it is exactly what I just said. So, but it'll be interesting to see how it works out. Now, last but not least, and I try to stay away from politics, so I'm staying away from politics, but I was more interested in your view without taking a political view, and you could pass on it if you want to also, of the recent Trump trial that happened in New York. And I guess the addition was that there was some, I guess, some message that the judge, there was a post on, I think it was X. No, it was on a court website from somebody that said that they had a cousin who was on the jury, and the cousin said the day before the verdict was released that it was going to be a guilty verdict. So if that was the case and there was communication like that, that would really be problematic. Some people say that this particular person who made the post was known already to this court system and had made a bunch of other posts that turned out not to be accurate. So we'll have to see how that plays out. And I'm sure the judge will do some kind of hearing just to cover himself, and I'll give him the benefit of the doubt because he brought it up, to find out if there's truth to it. But keeping that aside, I'd be interested to get your opinions on just kind of the trial itself without the politics, and what you thought of it, and what maybe one thing struck you about it. And we can start off with Kristen again, and you have the option not to answer the question if you so choose.
Yeah, I've covered actually a lot of trials in that courthouse, but I wish I had been there to hear everything in person, because I think then you have a better idea. You just get snippets, and that doesn't always give you a real good view. I would have liked to heard the instructions to the jury too, because there was a lot of debate about that, but I didn't hear them. So I don't know. That's why I think you should have cameras in the courtroom and just let people watch it without commentary. And I think it was very helpful when we do have cameras in the courtroom. Early in my career, I used to cover a lot of trials with the camera on, and it was great because people could see what we were seeing, and then they weren't relying on someone to tell them. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah,
Curtis?
I honestly am ignorant to most of the details. I've read the headlines, and how impactful that can be, taking somebody else's interpretation as fact. So I do think it's interesting that this is all playing out, right? It's unprecedented, right? To see this all play out. I have no idea though. I'm going to wait to form my full opinion after the conclusion, and after some more exchanges happen.
So two things struck me, and again, I didn't follow the trial closely, whatever, and I don't like any of the candidates, by the way. So I'm not a fan of anybody. So hopefully I can give a somewhat objective opinion. What struck me, one was, and I really didn't want. I didn't want this case. I thought it was a case that really shouldn't have been, notwithstanding, I don't think that anybody's angelic here. I don't feel sorry for anybody, not like that. But I thought, this is really not something that you really need to prosecute, my opinion.
Slope, right?
Yeah. Really not. Again, I'm not being sympathetic to anybody. I just thought, I wouldn't have done it. And it made me feel uncomfortable that they prosecuted. Even if they were perfectly justified in their minds and they believed it, I just thought it was a poor choice myself. The second part was, and it related to the jury instruction. There's a jury instruction, basically the way it was set up. And again, this is not my forte, but there's a crime that was committed, but the crime that was committed had to involve another crime. But it didn't have to involve a single crime. So all jurors could have found there was a crime, but they could have theoretically found there was 12 different crimes committed. Each one might have found there's a different crime. So the question then is, and this applies to everybody, you have a due process right. So you need to be able to understand what you can't do. So there has to be a law, and then that you can't do that. So usually in a jury, if there's one crime and everybody finds an agreement, then there's kind of a good case to be made. You're kind of on notice of that. If all these people agree, then you're kind of on notice on it. But the way that jury instruction was set up, you couldn't determine if the jury agreed on the same crime. And I think, I don't know when, but I think at some level, the outcome will be reversed, and part of that will be that jury instruction. Because I think
like the appeal process is going to be a long one, right? Like this thing is
Yeah.
going to drag out.
Yeah, it will. It'll, and you know, it depending on how the election plays out, that'll be interesting to see how the appellate process works out. But I thought that was an issue that struck me as that made me uncomfortable too. So that was my 2 cents worth in terms of the trial. I just was curious what your feelings were. I know a lot of people watched, and you know, what you were saying is true also, Kristen. Like it reminded me of the O.J. Simpson trial.
Right.
You saw that the whole thing,
Mhm.
and you know, on one side you would say, unfortunately, perhaps lawyers and the judge then are performative in a way, so maybe they do things a little differently, and maybe they take positions a little differently. But on the other side, you get to see everything, and very few people get a chance to go to court or see a trial or participate, and don't get to see kind of why it's difficult, why it's difficult to convict somebody. Why, if somebody does something, why isn't it just that they get convicted? This way they kind of see the nuts and bolts and the pieces, and I thought it was illustrative. And unfortunately, I guess New York does, and I think I had one case once where Court TV was going to do it, but the other side they said no.
Yeah, that's the thing. You have to have both sides agree.
Yeah,
and
yeah. But I think
there's like professional, I used to call them professional court watchers, people who would just interested in the justice system, and they would go in and just watch a trial from the very first moment to the end. And they really were very educated voters then, because they understood how things worked.
Yeah, I think you're right. I wish there was more of that.
Me
but
too.
Maybe in the future there'll be more. You know, you could, but whatever. That you can watch. You know, anybody wants to watch, you can watch all the Supreme Court arguments.
Mm-hmm.
Now they're usually pretty boring. You know, because usually the issues are not like who committed the murder. It's whether like this section of a statute is constitutional under the 12th Amendment. And, you know, for a lot of people, including myself, that's kind of boring. But it's interesting to get an idea of the justices and see who asks questions and just get a feel for it, you know. Anyway, we've been going about an hour and a half. I wanted to each give you a chance to say a closing remark if you want or not. Start off with Kristen.
Just thanks for having us. I think it's a good discussion. I think, you know, I like that people are educating themselves. I think the MMTLP community, we talked about that, Richard, before when Curtis wasn't on, but we were saying like how educated people are there. You have to be careful who you listen to. You have to be careful who who's telling you, because there are paid shills. So you just have to be very careful, but educate yourself and make your own decisions.
Curtis?
Love that. Yeah, this has been a grind. I think you said it eloquently, Richard. Like I didn't expect to be here doing this. I'm glad I said something Friday night before going to bed before my race. I was kind of reflecting, and we haven't really had a proper chance to do that yet because we're nowhere near the end, right? Until we actually have some resolution, we're not at the end, but it is the thing that keeps me going personally are the people. So I appreciate you hosting this, Richard, and Kristen for being here. The people make it fun at times. It's not always fun. It wasn't my idea of a good day to pick up the phone and talk to Congress, right? Or to be talking to other retail investors about, a various load of topics. But I have made really great lifelong friendships that will be lifelong friendships in this networking opportunity galore, and with people that I would have never interacted with. And I've gotten an education process on pieces of this that I didn't know and never had any intention of ever learning out of necessity. But there's good with the bad. But I am also very optimistic that we will have a positive resolution with MMTLP. The thing that is obvious and is going to become more obvious day by day is we have more advocates on the media front or just independent front every day, either because I'm milking this joke like so bad. I'm going to set the record for the milk joke, not just because there's more interest on the media front and on coverage front, but because it's affecting them. Because when more people are affected, they take a relative interest in the topic, and more people are affected every day. They're coming to the table and getting educated. And I think eventually we will have that domino effect movement. So I'm positively optimistic. So
thank you. I agree with you, by the way. I think I still feel the same way. Just, timing is impossible to determine. I hope, next week it'd be great. By the way, what's the difference between a lawyer and a liar?
Some letters.
Yeah, the spelling.
I got it.
You got it there. I wanted to say, I agree. I'd rather not be here, but it's been great. Met so many people, learned so much. So that part's great, but I would prefer if we wouldn't have the need to be here, right? But the thing that struck me throughout is how nice, because there's shills out there, and there's, whatever. There's a small number of people that are not very nice, but I've been amazed and impressed at the number of shareholders that are grateful for anybody working on their behalf. And it's really appreciated and noticed. And it really is, I thank everybody. And that's why I'll leave it at that. So I wanted to thank both of you for joining. I love having you both on because I always learn things from you and appreciate listening to you. And I know everybody else does too. So thank you again. We'll ask you again at some future point in time, and hopefully we will talk about better things and improve things. But again, I wanted to thank you both, and have a successful and excellent week. And I'm sure we will see each other in comments thereafter.
Well, thanks for all you're doing too, Richard, and Curtis, obviously, both of you. You guys are working really hard, so we appreciate it.
Well, thank you, and thanks, Curtis.
Thank you both.
Okay, have a great night. Be well, everybody.
You too.